Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Philip Chotta. I will be the host of this webinar series that we're doing at the University of Oxford in the run-up for COP26. And I'm extremely delighted today to have two fantastic speakers here at our webinar that will help us discuss the quite challenging issue of decarbonizing food cold chains and how to sustainably scale them to those places that do not have access. So our first speaker will be Professor Toby Peters. He's from the University of Birmingham, and he's a world-leading expert on food cold chains and systems thinking around cold chains and decarbonization. Our second speaker is Nnaemeka, who's the CEO of Cold Hubs. He is a founder and CEO of Cold Hubs, which is a very innovative company from Nigeria that has been doing some fantastic and very remarkable work of scaling cold chains and sustainably fueled cold chains with solar systems, where access to cold chains and food cooling has just not been there prior. So super delighted and excited to have both of you here. And I will just hand the word to Tony. Sorry that you, I'm just seeing that. Just one thing, if you want to ask a question, the way how we will do this is we will have both presenters present for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have a section where we have some time to ask questions. Please use the Ask the Question button at the lower end in your bottom right corner if you do have any questions, and we will address them after both presentations are done. And with that, I'm handing over to Professor Toby Peters. Please, the floor is yours, Toby. I think you might be muted. Toby.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, but we can't see your screen right now.
Okay, let's get that done. I'm not very good with technology. Great. Can you see my slides as well? Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you a lot for inviting me here today. And also, I'm really excited to be presenting alongside Cold Hubs. The work Nnaemeka is doing there is just phenomenal. I think it's a great project. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about that later and his progress there. So from my perspective, I think 2020 was the year that the importance of cold chains in society, ensuring continuous resilient supply of food and vaccines, really became more visible. We can't feed the world, we can't keep the world healthy and safe without global cold chains. And at the same time, we can't meet our climate goals without managing how we deliver this rapid growth in cooling. Interestingly, sustainable cooling cold chains, in my view, underpin each of the 5 priority areas of COP 2026: adaptation, resilience, nature, energy transition, accelerating the move to zero carbon road transport, and finance. But if we're going to transform the cold chain sectors from farm to fork or manufacturer to arm, and deliver access to cooling for all who need it sustainable in the shortest possible time, we've got to work together at all levels: industry, private sector, governments, academia, development institutions, civil society, to make this happen. And through the Centre for Sustainable Cooling, which I am the co-director of with Professor Yulong Ding, we brought together, I think, a unique cross-discipline team, including London South Bank, Cranfield, Heriot Watt, to work with UK and international partners across a series of significant post-harvest management and cold chain research projects in both the developed and developing markets. We've built a portfolio of interlinked system-based projects, probably now one of the largest, if not the largest, set of programs worth about £20 million of research funding, which includes designing mass-scale COVID-19 vaccination using Bangladesh as the case study, the New Africa Centre of Excellence, which I'll be talking about, and back here in the UK, a whole system of systems farm to consumer fridge approach to look at cold chains out to 2050. so we can deliver both the net zero target and also food security and support the economic opportunities, and a parallel project in Europe led by partners out of Denmark with 29 partners from 11 EU nations. But today I want to focus down on food cold chain, specifically in developing markets. And for me, I think the evidence is now absolutely clear. Food saved is as important as food produced. But are we asking the right exam question or the complete question? So yes, how do you create the local and global filter fork to nutritiously feed and protect 9-10 billion people by 2050? But at the same time, how do you achieve this whilst protecting and economically empowering the hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers whose livelihoods and well-being are often dependent on only 1 or 2 hectares of land? And as important, how do you achieve all of this within the environmental limits of our planet? Conventional cold chains, as we know, are energy intensive and also use ozone depleting and climate warming refrigerants. So this is the challenge. And for me, the problem is that current cold chain interventions normally focus on the low risk, siloed approaches aimed to solve solutions or issues in isolation. However, the food cold chain is a complex system with many integrated, static and moving, temperature-controlled elements from farm, post-harvest management, packaging, sorting and grading, right the way through to the point of sale and indeed consumption. And it ensures that perishable food, temperature-sensitive products are kept at their optimum right the way through to maintain their quality, nutritional value and safety. And at the same time, cold chain must equally consider the packaging used, the types of material, the handling equipment, all of these elements. As such, establishing a robust and sustainable cold chain requires the continued integrated and seamless management of these elements, protecting against the potential negative environmental or social impact or unintended consequences. And it requires accountability from multiple levels, including farmers, processors, manufacturers, aggregators, distributors, retailers, and consumers. So in short, for me, developing a sustainable cold chain is what's called a wicked problem, with diverse partners, drivers, and barriers, all interconnected, all varying across countries depending on the local economic, environmental, social, cultural, and political circumstances. And so it's much more than simply installing a solar cold room at a farm gate, a solar fridge in a health centre, or a chiller cabinet with lower GWP refrigerants in supermarkets. Ultimately, there could be far-reaching social, economic, and environmental consequences from rushing to deploy technologies and infrastructure without a comprehensive evaluation of the whole system and the complexities and its impact on energy use and climate risks, and its role across nutrition, health, and livelihood sustainability. And so the way to support a cold chain is through planning and coordination. As donors, yes, tackle smaller or siloed issues, but within the system and through the collaborative efforts with others to ensure each element of the farm to fork cold chain is addressed. Equally, to deliver sustainable solutions, we need to help developing countries build the skills and capacities required to ensure both proper system design and accessible business modules, and also then the proper installation and servicing of next generation, more technically complex, potentially data system connected equipment with lower or negligible GWP refrigerants, whilst at the same time delivering short-term interventions to reduce cooling loads, energy requirements of equipment and the GWP of refrigerants. So for me, it's about the system level thinking, but at the same time, it's recognizing this essential need for skills and capacity building, both business models, but technology. And to that end, this is what we're doing at the Africa Centre of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, which underpinned with multi-million-pound public sector investment by the governments of UK and Rwanda and with industry collaboration. We're looking to open this in 2022 with its own 96-acre campus in Kigali. And we're close to signing off a second centre in India. And our aim then is to have further centres working together to create the pathways to sustainable cooling and cascade the delivery mechanisms. The job of the centre isn't simply to demonstrate technology, but help localise it, develop the skills base to support installation, maintenance, and the business models, including what we've called for many years now, and I'm sure you'll hear about with Cold Hubs, cooling as a service. Broadly, it's built around 4 blocks: business incubator, knowledge hub, technology hub, and research centre. And for me, the business centre is really important because that's where we're going to develop the sustainable business model, look at the financing opportunities alongside building up the skills. And it's totally going to work farm to fork. So post-harvest handling, storage quality. If you don't actually get the product right out of the ground and into the system, you're embedding loss. The whole cold chain logistics zone, looking at energy and the energy storage opportunities, right the way through to data, digital transformation, business startup, and of course, quality control. And the aim then is to see how, with the centre based in Africa, we can use living labs in strategic locations across Africa to act as the deployment and implementation arms and drive the adoption and uptake of energy efficient solutions by showcasing how they can be used. And we're starting work already on our first living lab in Kenya with in-country partners. One thing I know we're talking about food, but within this, it's really important to actually recognize also the importance of cold chain, as we've seen with COVID-19. Again, it's about the system. How do you get from manufacture right the way to outreach? And so we're going to be looking at this in parallel with the food cold chain. So this is a whole systems approach. And I think this is the critical element we've got to start thinking about and take away. We've got to understand the cooling demands and understand how we then make, store, move, and manage cold to achieve the successful outcomes to deliver climate change mitigation strategies and also the resilient cold chains we require. And within that, we need to minimize the demand for artificial cooling. We need to see how we can aggregate synergies within the cold chain to better integrate different cooling demands into a single system. How can we make use of natural, renewable, and waste energy resources, especially thermal? How can we use the energy efficient technologies? And of course, how can we ensure the systems are properly installed and maintained? With regard to understanding needs, I think this is where we have to start the work, and we've developed at Heriot-Watt, working with Cooling for All, part of Sustainable Energy for All, a peer-reviewed tool for governments, development institutions, and non-government organisations to assess the full spectrum of cooling needs, as well as identify the policy, technology, and financial measures to address these needs. And I think this is really important because a focus on per capita equipment penetration presupposes that top-down technical solution rather than allowing you to think about other ways to meet the cooling demand. Another area which for me is very important is digital twins, developing a sustainable food cold chain. This is a multi-dimensional, multi-sectoral challenge. And due to the complexity, I believe, and we're doing this across multiple areas, including the UK, Europe, in Africa, Bangladesh with cold chain, with COVID, is to build digital twins, essentially creating a virtual world where you look at all the infrastructure, the demand profiles, the climate, and the technology choices, and can analyze using high-powered computers thousands upon thousands of different scenarios very quickly. And the output can answer the questions around location planning, technology requirement, energy requirement, distribution strategy. And you can look at these in the virtual world before testing them in reality, so reducing risk and cost. As said, We believe that taking a systems approach and integrated solution will allow us to deliver opportunities out of complexity. And as one example is the community cooling hub, which is an integrated system approach we're exploring in Kenya and other markets to meet the broad portfolio of a rural community's cold chain and wider cooling needs. And but by designing the system from a community needs perspective, understanding concurrently a range of different cooling needs related to agriculture, post-harvest, animal husbandry, health, thermal comfort, transport, and others, we think that a pack house can become a community cooling hub, offering wider community services that boost economic growth and social welfare. It'll enable the design and the management of more integrated and synergistic solutions, reducing demand, harnessing renewables, waste energy. And I think it will allow us to bundle costs and revenue streams and to link investment to the full impact. So, in my view, by taking these approaches, we can really see how we can address the UN SDGs, Paris, and Kigali simultaneously. And on that point, Philip, I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Toby. That was extremely insightful and very, very useful to see that, and really interesting to see your kind of, how you've set this up and also the many different benefits this can have. So thank you very much, and we will shortly talk about this in more detail. But before we do that, I would love to hand the floor to Nnaemeka, who can maybe actually add to some of these experiences, especially in an African context where he has, done some really pioneering work on increasing kind of integrated cold chain solutions. So please, Nnaemeka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip, for the kind introduction. Let me quickly share my screen in full mood. And I think it's also an honor for me to be presenting alongside Professor Toby, whose research and advocacy has placed this topic at the highest level of conversations within the space. And thank you very much, Professor Toby, for the work you are doing. So over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to really talk about the work we are doing at Cold Hubs, and my presentation will provide some insights around the cold chain shortages in Nigeria, the role of business models to expand the cold chain capacity, and I also talk about the needed enablers who will support the scaling of solutions such as the work we are doing. But first of all, as a quick introduction, my name is Nnaemeka Ikegwuonu, and I'm a farmer, a radio presenter, and a social entrepreneur. And I founded my first venture, the Smallholders Foundation, in 2003 as a non-profit that does agricultural radio broadcasting, and Cold Hubs in 2015 as a social business that promotes solar-powered cold storage. In my previous venture, our flagship was actually the Smallholder Farmers Rural Radio, where I spent time talking about agriculture and receiving farmer listeners' responses 10 hours every day in our local Igbo language. A very exciting and enriching work, which I still do 3 times a week. And the other time I spend, traveling through the length and breadth of Nigeria, a very vast country with more than 300 different tribes speaking different languages. And when I do that, I sit down with farmers to identify the challenges and opportunities within the agricultural space so that we can co-create solutions. And really it was in the course of my travels that I discovered that more than 45% of food is lost due to lack of cold storage at key points along the food supply chain. And these food supply chain are really farm clusters, horticultural produce aggregation centers, and also in outdoor food markets. In 2011, 2012, when we saw this problem, we didn't know that the Rockefeller Foundation was actually looking at it, and then we come out with statistics showing that 93 million small farmers and food supply chain actors lose an estimated 25% of their income due to this challenge of food spoilage. So when you travel along Nigerian roads, it's a typical picture of citrus and other high quality fresh produce dumped on the roadside due to lack of storage. You know, people, mostly farmers, get frustrated. They just dump it on the roadside and move on. And these are typical pictures that you see as you travel along Nigerian highways. We all understand the role of refrigeration, and it can be used to really extend the shelf life of food. But this very critical infrastructure does not exist in any of Nigeria food aggregation centers because the power grids are not capable of delivering reliable energy. And most of the refrigeration equipment that can actually offer cooling at large scale is really expensive and out of reach for the average farmer, the retailer, or the wholesaler to actually afford. You know, according to the Global Cold Chain Alliance, Nigeria has one of the lowest cold storage capacities in Africa, only about 10,000 cubic meters, whereas countries like Namibia have 150,000 with a population hovering about 2 million or 2.5 million. South Africa, 323,000. Morocco, 1.7 million. And Egypt, about 3.250 million. You know, the data shows great potentials to develop and harness the enormous benefits of cold chain for Nigeria, especially for the fresh fruit and vegetable sector in this country. The cold chain that is presently available in Nigeria is for the health sector and the fish sector. You know, there is a massive importation of fish into Nigeria from Europe and Asia. And the companies that are actually importing the fish actually were able to build a vast network of blast freezers at the seaport and at the hinterlands, mostly driven by these digital generators, as you can see on the side, to support their distribution network. You know, this is purely commercial driven interest to support the distribution of fish from the seaport once they leave the reefer containers into the hinterland for these companies, you know. And again, the federal government of Nigeria took multiple vaccinations, invested a lot of money in building cold storages for the vaccines through the National Primary Health Care Agency. But you find out and you discover that cold storage is not really available to preserve fresh fruit, vegetables, root and tuber crops, floriculture in Nigeria. It was actually not existent until 2015 when we launched cold hubs. The result of this is like most farmers sun dry fresh fruit and vegetables. You know, if you travel towards the northwest in the states like Katsina, Kano, and Kaduna, near the border with Niger Republic, you will see hectares of land being used to quickly sun dry tomatoes, the green pepper, and red pepper, and so many other commodities, you know. But the return on the farmers for dried food is significantly less than the return from selling high quality fresh fruit and vegetables, which needs refrigeration to keep maintain the quality. So in 2015, we pretty much founded Cold Hubs as a company that actually designs, builds, operates, and maintains these 100% solar powered working cold rooms. You know, the cold rooms are specially designed for installation wherever you need cold storage. It can be on the banks of the Atlantic Ocean. It can be in a meat processing place. It can be within a farm cluster of green bean farmers. It can also be in a horticultural aggregation center where you have 500 to 600 farmers coming together once a week to trade their commodities and hand it over to the wholesalers. And it can also be in outdoor food markets, you know. The goal is really to extend the shelf life of food from 2 days to more than 21 days by bringing refrigeration closer to farmers at farm gates where they need it the most. You know, so in 2015 we deployed our first cold room, and we understood that technology alone cannot really solve the challenge. You know, so we started education. We developed educational comic around the technology, and we spent a minimum of 5 days teaching farmers best practices in harvesting, the value of having cold storage, the nutritional value, the financial value. And after our educational classes, we conduct a one-day open the hub day. And what we typically do is that we go around the farm cluster or outdoor food markets and gather all the commodities available in two sets. One set is kept inside the cold room and one set is kept outside the cold room. And we come the next day where we open the cold room and all the trainees observe the quality, texture, coloration, water content of all the commodities kept in the cold room and the ones kept outside. And it serves as an eye opener because from there we create adoption rate for the technology, because we are pioneering a technology that has not been used before by these smallholder farmers. But really, also having the technology and education does not really create an automatic adoption. So what we looked at was democratizing space, liberalizing cold storage. And the goal is to have a revenue model that is a pay-as-you-store revenue model. So we charge an equivalent of 26 US cents presently, which is 100 Nigerian naira, to store 120-kilogram plastic crate of anything from okra to tomato to bell pepper inside the cold room per day. With these, we not only bring refrigeration education to the users, we allow them to store and pay when they have need for that. For instance, they do not need to invest upfront in a high capex driven infrastructure. We source the grant funding, we source debt funding to build it, and over a period of time, the space is rented. And I believe this is the most functional business model that should expand cold chain capacity in a low global warming potential way, because most of the people we are working with cannot afford that upfront capex to own this infrastructure. So we also looked at operations and decided that because food handling in this part of the world is more or less seen as a very good job for women, so we decided to hire 2 women to run each cold hub. So at each cold hub facility, you have a hub operator who oversees loading and offloading of food, and you also have a hub attendant who assists the hub operator, but also goes into the market, the farm cluster, to onboard new customers and also deepen our educational content. Over the past 4 years, we've been very, very grateful to all our partners who supported us to deploy 54 cold rooms that we are running at the moment. Last year, we saved 42 tons of food. This is the total number of food stored in our cold rooms. We are doing more this year. We are almost doubling that. We've signed up 5,250 farmers, retailers, and wholesalers who are using our services, and they've increased their income from previously about $60 every month to a minimum of $100, $120 every month today, simply by selling the previous 50, 45%, 40% food that they usually sell off or throw away. Over these 4 years, we've also created 66 jobs for women by recruiting and training them to work as our hub operators and market attendants. And we've saved more than 1 million kilograms of CO2 by using renewable energy exclusively in all our systems with no need for diesel generators at all. So we are now presently preparing to expand all across Nigeria. We are projecting about 100 cold hubs by the end of 2022 and possibly 20 new ice points for artisanal fisher folk across the coastal areas of Nigeria. And what we've seen is really that the enablers to support this kind of scale are really customized financing. This sector doesn't have customized financing, so if we are going to push natural refrigerant-driven cold storage that leverages on renewable energy, we really need to have customized financing. And these are financing that understands the numbers, the patience in the financing, and the need to be really flexible in such financing. So over the past few years, we've leveraged on financing that are either grants or debt, where we sit down with the funder to really design a suitable financing for cold hub. So I think the next step will really be to have customized financing as more activities are coming up within the sector. Related to that is human resources. We have a large chunk of our technicians and refrigeration experts in this country. We are using the HFC refrigerants, which they are very familiar with. Most of the RO290 refrigerants, they are not familiar with. I remember in 2015 when we were setting up code hubs with all RO290 refrigerants in our systems, and we wanted to see if there will be availability of RO290 refrigerants in the future as we are rolling out these units. So we approached the biggest Nigerian refrigerant company, Bulk Gases. We actually told them that we are dealing on, we want to buy RO290 gas for stock, and they were very surprised. They refused to sell the gas to us because no one has ever bought it in the country. And they actually agreed to sell to us after they have made physical visits to our facility, checking out our compressors and determining that we actually had need for RO290 refrigerant gases. So there is a paucity, really, lack of skill set in the natural refrigerants. And if we are going to promote these gases to reduce the global warming potential of air conditioning and refrigeration, we really need the right people that will really come in and drive it through. Because technicians are needed today, they are needed tomorrow, they are needed in the sector as much as possible. The third enabler is the right technology. There is multiplicity of technology from all over the world. Thermal storage in different PCM tablets, energy storage in batteries with assorted batteries, all manner of compressors, all manner of evaporators. But I think the right technology within this space will be technology that enhances resilience within the climate change, technology that supports climate change adaptation. And there are some of these technologies, but we also discovered that most of them are still in research stage, and most of them have not really been commercialized. So as we are going to scale, there is need for the right technology that supports adaptation to climate change, that is as green as possible, which we can use to demonstrate 100% green cooling completely. So in a nutshell, that is my presentation and discussion about code hubs, and I'll be very, very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nnaemeka. I think this was extremely inspiring, and I'm very glad that you and Toby are part of this webinar here, because I think there was a lot of complementarity between what you have said, and you gave a lot of really kind of numbers from the ground, working in this field to illustrate what Toby was talking about. So this was fascinating. The way how I want to go about now is I have a couple of questions from my side, and then I will open it up to the audience. I've already seen that two very interesting questions came through. So let's, if anybody has any questions, you can type them into the bottom, the little field on the bottom right corner. Before we do that, I just wanted to throw in, I really loved, Nnaemeka and Toby did it a bit too, to have some stats here. I mean, cold chains are absolutely fascinating in terms of their impact, and they're so under-researched and under-reported, given how large their impact is. It's just a few things. So food waste is accounts for 6% of global emissions. So if food waste were a country, some of you may have heard this, it would be the third biggest emitter of global warming potential. So this is a massive issue, and then despite that being the case, on the other side you actually have around 1% of global emissions being due to cold chains, which of course are mainly in high income and middle income countries, because the coverage is so small. So you have these two massive problems. On the one side, that you have the carbon footprint from food waste, but also actually avoiding food waste is also quite carbon intensive, at least as we're currently doing it. And interesting thing is that cold chains in industrialized countries actually grow by three times quicker currently than global GDP. So asset growth rate is around 7% in middle and high income countries. And then a stat that I read recently, which I thought was fascinating, was that the average age of cold storage facilities in the US is 42 years old. Which is just speaks to kind of the scale of transformation that we have to go through, not only in countries where there are no or very limited cold chain facilities, but also in more industrialized countries. So just reflecting on these big things, these stats and this impact, and you've both talked about the systemic approach that we need to solve this issue. I would love to hear from both Toby and Nnaemeka actually what you believe is the single biggest challenge in order to do this, and what would be needed to overcome this, to really scale systemic thinking and solution implementations quickly going forward. Maybe Toby, start with you, and then Nnaemeka.
I think that two, if I may, big challenges. The first one is that governments don't take cold chain recognized for what it is. It's absolutely central to our infrastructure. It's critical to our, health and food, as we're seeing in the UK, with food delivery. But equally, I found it really interesting when last year, in February last year, we were talking around, we've got to design a vaccine for COVID, we've got to manufacture it. No one recognized the challenge of distributing it and keeping it at the right temperature. And so for me, one of the big challenges that it is a blind spot, and it's not something where until now we people have invested. We've got, as I said, 15 million pounds of research programs, and that's one of the biggest. There should be hundreds of millions of pounds of research being put into this in every country, and it has to be recognised as important as a road or a railway track. This piece of infrastructure to keep our food and vaccines. And the other area, which is really important, is if governments do that, is that we are not going to solve the problem without training and skills. It's no point, as Nnaemeka said, we can't simply go and look at deploying pieces of kit if you don't have the people to install them properly and maintain them. So you've got to have the skills base to underpin the rollout. I think the number, you wanted numbers, I think at the moment, we've got about 3.6 billion pieces of cooling equipment deployed globally, a lot of it air conditioning, obviously. By 2050, that number could be actually 9.5 billion. If we want to deliver cooling for all and actually address the sustainable development challenges, it's going to be closer to 15 billion pieces of equipment. Every one of those has to be maintained. So, we've got to recognize the importance, we've got to put skills in, and the third one is we've got to put the financial models to make it accessible. Nnaemeka, over to you. Back to you, Philip.
Yeah, I think Toby has really capped it all. You need the right financing. We need a lot of capital behind it. It is really a costly or expensive system to build, whether the financing is going to come from government or private sector, but you need a lot of financing behind it. But the financing has to be customized, to fit into the cold chain. There was a global funding for HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. I think we also need a global funding for cold chain at some point, that will fund research, that will fund testing of prototypes, that will scale both for health, food, meat, different sectors entirely, And related to that is really, we have total lack of skills in the developing world. We use Nigeria as an instance. The average age of a refrigeration and air condition technician is about 50, 55, 60 years. Yeah. The young people are not interested in that, studying refrigeration, whether as vocational or in university. They are not really interested, because there is believe that refrigeration technicians never make money, which is not true. So we need to incentivize that sector so that we can crowd in more young people into the sector. So those are the two key elements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Again, we have seemingly alignment here, and I couldn't agree more from the work that I'm doing. The one thing that I think both of you, and especially Nnaemeka, has now talked about multiple times is on finance, and I do believe that there's a big problem here. We've had one of the questions come through that was pretty close to what I wanted to ask in terms of public funding, because Nnaemeka, if I understand you correctly, what you're, and actually Toby as well, what you're trying to do is you're kind of moving away from a purely, we just look at cold chains and put cold chains in and then move on, but there's much more of a systems view. Toby had, I think, I don't know, I couldn't count them, but like 8 or 9 different SDGs on his slide where this could be impactful. Now, the way how a lot of finance works, especially public finance that I'm seeing, is quite limited in terms of certain sectors. So you might have some, the World Bank has some finance instruments that helps you get energy access. If you provide energy access as a mini grid company, if you connect a household, then you get some money. But it will be a lot. From what I've been hearing, it's a bit more challenging to make them understand, hey, you actually need to finance cold chains if you want to do something on energy access. Have you had similar experiences? Have you had any support from, this is Sindra's question here from the chat, if there's been any support from the African Development Bank, from the World Bank, to de-risk some of these integrated models? And if so, any examples would be interesting. And if not, can you think of any kind of, how these finance instruments could actually pan out to really give this a push and scale up? Maybe Nnaemeka first for this one, and then Toby, you can chip in.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think it was last week I had from the president of Haifa International that the World Bank president had made a statement that for the food sector, we really need cold chain, and I hope that that statement from the World Bank president will translate to possibly designing financing instruments to support the cold chain for food. But truly, it's a multi-sectoral approach. It's not only for food, it's very essential for health. We have very low vaccination rates for the COVID vaccines in Nigeria. And, when we did a research early in the year to look at possible distribution network, we understood that there was virtually the whole investment in cold chain for vaccines, like I showed in my presentation. Most of them actually needs very high level of maintenance at the moment, So you identify that not only for the food sector, but for the health sector and other sectors. So such financing must adopt a multi-sectoral approach, to see that cold chain is needed is a very important element. What we have now is really, you have the energy, productive use of energy financing, which we can go to and make an argument for cold chain that is renewable energy driven. But we need a customized financing that understands the cold chain, the economics of the cold chain, the long payback period, the depreciation of cold chain facilities. That is very, very important. That also pushes the need for best practices for cold chain. And that multi-sectoral financing is not what is not available. And I use every medium I find myself to call for the customized financing for that purpose.
Toby, you want to add anything on that?
I mean, 2 things. I mean, one of the things which gets me frustrated is that Nnaemeka, I've known cold hubs for a long time, and quite frankly, I would be expecting some development bank to be putting up a line of credit where Nnaemeka can go and say, here's a project, can you roll them out? Because he shouldn't be rolling out, I can't remember what your number was, a few hundred. This is something that could be rolling out thousands, but it's the access to finance with the problem. The other thing is that, look, this is a wicked problem. Government, people don't like wicked problems. They actually like putting down single solutions. But sooner or later, we have to recognize that a cold chain, be it for food or vaccines, which is moving from one end to the other through multiple stages of built environment and logistics, and is looking at different challenges, financing, everything, is a complex problem. And we also have to do it in a way which is sustainable. So I think, yes, access to finance, getting the development banks involved, that's what we're looking to do through the ACES program, and moving them from funding silo to actually having the confidence to come in and underpin a robust business model, which is end to end, is essential. Otherwise, we're not going to get this. What we will do, and I come back to that opening question, this isn't simply just about feeding the world. This is about feeding the world whilst protecting hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers. Right? We've got to do both of those. And that requires new business models which give access to technology and access to the value chain.
Yeah, thanks very much, both of you. It's very fascinating and also a little bit frustrating, I can see, because Nnaemeka, if I recall correctly, I don't think you had it on your slides, but I think I've seen before. Can you just remind us really quick of the price of one of your cooling units?
How much? There are two cooling units at the moment. The energy storage and batteries goes for 29,000 US dollar, depending on where you ship from.
See, and just at 50% utilization, that was the number that I had in mind. And just at 50% utilization, this actually pays back economically without any, any sort of thing. It pays back after 2 years, right? So like for normal investments, this is already a really good payback time. For investment in the sub-Saharan African region, where you have a huge problem with, finance and people having money, it seems like, an absolute no-brainer. But despite these great business models being there, working in this space, I come from the energy space, and I feel like, we have made such great strides in terms of business models. You see it in the energy access space, which is maybe a few more years advanced than cold chains, where we've really seen this uptick. Now I think the business models are almost there, but the risk or the readiness of public sector institutions or public finance to embrace that and de-risk some of these integrated solutions, I think is really a common problem. So, and I guess the same goes for climate finance, I assume. So if you think about maybe my last question, then we can go also to the chat. If you think about decarbonization specifically of the cold chain, of course you have this issue where you don't actually have cold chains. Maybe in that, if you want to speak about that context, is there sort of a trade-off between putting in cold chains that then increase maybe the carbon footprint but decrease food loss? Any thoughts on that from Nnaemeka maybe? And Toby, if I don't know to which extent you have also had a look at sort of cold chains in industrialized countries and what type of approaches you could think about there for decarbonization there. So any strategies around that would be very interesting. Maybe go on Nnaemeka first and then Toby.
Yeah, I think the future of cold chain is really decarbonized cold chain, all for the next 100 years or so on, because it has already been proven that technologies that are most fit for cold chain at this point in time are the ones that does not leave any environmental footprint. So as we are solving that critical environmental challenge, you're also solving the problem of food spoilage. So it's a win-win on both sides. I am talking to a program in Alaska today that is looking at deploying technologies like cold hubs in Alaska, which is supposed to be very cold, but they have actually seen need for decarbonized cold storage, that has no environmental footprint. And that is where I think the world is going to, more and more of these technologies will be developed, and more business models will be developed around it. We are pushing the business model of pay as you store because of the uniqueness of our society and environment. It fits it. But, in Europe, it may be a different business model. Probably in South Africa, it may be a different business model altogether. So there will be more business model around it. But I think the next years of the cold chain infrastructure will be completely green.
Adding to that, I mean, it will be green if you've got the skills. You know, we're not going to deploy natural refrigerants in Africa without having the skills and capacity to deliver it. And equally, I think, again, you know, it is a complex problem, because what we're looking at in the developing world is sort of how do you, it's not, when we think about decarbonisation, you take, in the developed world, you take an existing marketplace and you talk about how you can reduce down the amount of CO2 from transport or whatever it is. Here, we're talking about a demand which hasn't yet been deployed. So we're talking about how we can deploy it in a sustainable way and mitigate a potential growth, but at the same time, as you said, showing that we're going to offset that against the savings from reducing food loss. So it's making people understand that simply reducing food loss, if we do it with environmentally harmful technologies, we won't get that win, and potentially it will get worse. So it's really important to actually be driving towards sustainable solutions. But it's not simply about just going to natural refrigerants. It's much more complex than that. It's about how do we mitigate the demand for cooling? How do we aggregate the demand? How do we harness the waste heat of a cooling solution to provide another service? How do we use thermal energy storage? All these elements of how do you make, store, move, use, manage cooling? How do you have aggregation, mitigation of demand, more efficient systems? And that, to me, is what we need to be looking at, and why it's a system approach, because it's actually the cooling system. And that's what the idea of the community cooling hub is you can aggregate services and you can aggregate funding. I mean, the one thing we forget about, and I know I probably get boring about it, but if you come to the developed world, you know, again, let's get back to maintenance. The biggest win we can have today is actually to make sure our cooling equipment is maintained. You know, because when you look at supermarkets, like, you know, where they're actually really reducing down leakage rates, it actually means they're running efficiently. When you look at the UNIDO studies on cooling, phenomenal energy losses simply because equipment isn't maintained. So yes, we've got to design for natural refrigerants. We've got to push the boundaries to get it right down. We've got to take the global cooling prize and use that concept in other areas to push forward to what can be achieved. But equally today, simply by increasing maintenance, we can have, you know, very big impacts. And we've got the same, you know, problem, Nnaemeka, as you said. I mean, over in the UK, the refrigeration industry is full of people like me, you know, male and old. We've got to get young people in to recognize the value.
Thank you, Toby. Old but full of ideas. So there's value for all of us to be had. So thank you for those insights. That's very, very insightful. Looking at the chat, there's a couple of really interesting questions, and I think they currently center around two topics. One is there's been a lot of interest, Nnaemeka, in your business model and some of the specificities there, and the other was how to actually, you know, now we've talked so much about the systemic nature of this problem. How do you get all these actors together and really drive this forward? Maybe start with the business model aspect first, Nnaemeka. I think people in the chat would like to know a bit more about a number of issues here. Actually, there was one question coming through from Jean-Baptiste. He was asking whether you work with farmers in cooperatives or whether they're independent. How do you site? How do you choose sites? Is it existing marketplaces or is it close to productions? That was one question, and maybe I'm just going to do them in a row, you know, on your business model. Nnaemeka, and you
Sure.
can respond to those. And there was another question whether you use anchor clients or not. So maybe a cold drink vendor who would take up more space of your cold hub. And then one was on reliability of systems. So comparing solar PV versus solar-driven heat pumps. So these are the three questions there. If you can respond to those.
Yeah, we generally work with cooperatives. Farmer clusters have cooperatives, and we conduct detailed scoping missions. At times, it takes us up to 3 months to actually deploy a cold chain, a cold room within a cluster. We really need to understand what is being the value chain of commodities. We need to understand the seasonality. If we have a cold room, will it be utilized 12 months of a year? We also need to understand the volume of loss, because based on the volume of loss, you can actually assume the willingness to pay for the service, But really, the whole concept is really to democratize and liberalize cooling space. And what we do is that we deploy a cold room. Within the local community, we hire a hub operator and a hub assistant, 2 ladies, train them, crash engineering, switch on and switch off, and how to report to HQ. Each cold room comes remotely monitored. We can actually see the number of times the door have been opened. And then we open the cold room for business. So what we try to do is to crowd in as many farmers as possible within the cluster. And in the markets, we also leverage on the market union, which is like a cooperative of retailers in the market. I don't know whether I've answered the second one or the third question. Can't remember the third question again.
There was one on the reliability of solar PV versus solar heat driven types. I don't know if you've looked into that at all.
Yeah, for us, we rely on solar PVs. We've looked at solar heat. We don't have the skill set locally. It's something that possibly we can leverage on in the future, but right now we have only the skill set for solar PV. So that's why we use solar PV. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. And then maybe on this last question in the chat, that was really about the systemic issue and on all these different actors, all these different SDGs, all these different issues, and that is of course a huge challenge. Is there any thoughts from your experience, Toby and Nnaemeka, how we can get people together and understand this and really move this forward, both in the policy space and but also in the finance space? Maybe Toby first, and then Nnaemeka, you can chip in.
Yeah, I mean that is a big challenge. There's no two ways about it. Bring together farmers, aggregators, logistics companies, all these elements to solve this problem, and retailers from different countries as the end customer. And sort of, so when you set out, hey, I'm going to have a system level approach, it's very easy to say it and pretty difficult to deliver it. But that's where I think I'm really lucky, or we've been really lucky by actually, getting a shout out for them. DEFRA, the UK government, actually putting in significant millions of pounds into the Africa Centre of Excellence, and then with the government of Rwanda, and then the support of UNEP and others, to create this place where we can bring together industry, the farming cooperatives, the retailers, and all the different elements, to actually design and work together to create the system and to create the finance model, and then bring in the World Bank and the others to understand it. So, I'm not sitting here naively saying it's easy, but I am sitting here thinking that with the Africa Centre of Excellence, these governments have enabled us to actually have a chance to get there and work to deliver, as I said, this double challenge of feed the world, protect smallholder farmers, and this third element of do it sustainably.
Yeah, I think we need such platforms where we crowd in all the players. The African Center of Excellence is a good model. We need to replicate such models across different African regions and also in other developing regions. We need platforms that brings the government, the private sector, industry, farmers, everyone to actually find solutions or co-create solutions rather. Then, those are platforms that we have seen that has been used in other sectors and they emerge successful. And I think for this sector, we need such platforms too. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much. And I believe actually, Nnaemeka, I think we don't only need those for developing countries and low-income countries. We need them for high-income countries as well, because these systemic challenges are there similarly. And I think both of you gave great examples here, and Toby with your hub, that you need to create these spaces for integrative work to happen. It doesn't happen automatically. You really need to foster that in this early going of kind of humankind understanding that we need systemic approaches to sustainable development. We need to create that space. Fantastic. We are at time. I would love, just one final question here, maybe a brief answer from both of you. Just imagine if, and this is a very tough one, but imagine you could change one thing in the system, around cold chains and decarbonization and sustainable cold chains. You could change one thing. What would that be? Nnaemeka and then Toby.
I think I would like to change the low understanding and create a system where people understand as quickly as possible, especially at that high level of policy making, and start solving the problem as quickly as possible. So once you talk about cold chain, people relate it to the vaccine sector. Recently, more and more activities they are relating it to the food, because of a lot of advocacy has been made. But we really, really, really crave that, once you talk about the cold chain, high policy makers will understand the challenge and deploy solutions.
From my perspective, I think adding on to that skills, let's actually really be investing in developing the skills. Let's not forget that refrigeration engineers in many countries, Australia, elsewhere, are the highest paid trades now in the world. But we need the skills. We're not going to deliver natural refrigerants without it. We're not going to deploy technology. Let's really develop the skills base.
Lovely. Thank you very much for this extremely insightful and fascinating discussion, both Nnaemeka and Toby. This was extremely useful and valuable. I certainly learned a lot. Thank you also to the audience who's been very active with a number of fascinating questions here. And we will publish a short policy brief with the key messages and takeaways from this discussion, which you can find on our webpage. And so please, thank you very much, and have a good afternoon. And I think we will close the session here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.